I'm first going to be bringing on our first speaker, and then we'll have a panel discussion. Laith Altimime is the president of Semi Europe. He's had a career in the semiconductor industry, working for a number of semiconductor and chip manufacturers. He's a great expert in this area. And of course, at Semi, he's working with many hundreds of members across the supply chain in semiconductors, and increasingly, I'm sure, as we'll hear, in automotive as well. We're going to play a short video to kind of set the scene, and then I'm going to ask Laith to come up and share some slides. So why don't we cue the video?
Imagine a world where the possibilities are endless, where everyone can participate and everyone can prosper. A world where how we live, how we learn, how we work, and how we play are all transforming. This is the world we live in now. There are already 30 billion connected devices and 200 million plus connected devices each new day. It's a world where every part of our lives is advancing faster than ever before. With 1 trillion connections by 2030, half of the world's population is on the web. Where cities are becoming the centers of learning, culture, careers, and rising economies that enhance our lives. At the speed of digital, innovation is transforming our planet. From smart factories to space exploration, from virtual medicine to energy alternatives and sustainable farming, from cutting-edge medical science to the world's most advanced semiconductors, we are redefining technology to make our world a better place. Led by networked intelligence, social media, mobility, AI, IoT, and big data, we have entered the 4th industrial revolution, and it is disrupting every industry, every country, and every life for the better. At Semi, we serve this incredible ecosystem that helps make the digital world possible. That's why our new story is so much bigger, because Semi is more. Today, we're extending our reach from semiconductor design to equipment, materials, devices, and applications. We're driving value in workforce development, expos, standards, and R&D funded programs. We're providing insights and exploring new opportunities with thought leadership. We're inspiring innovation and industry engagement through our technology communities and partnerships. We hold the big conversations that drive growth, influence public policy, and help make technologies safer. And together, we fuel endless possibility. Semi. Together, we are reshaping tomorrow.
Yes, I can hear myself. A very good morning. I think it's still morning time, and a big thank you to Chris for the kind introduction, but also to Automotive Logistics for the invitation. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today, and in person also. I think this is the biggest, the biggest plus now that we're coming back in person and also back into the business wear, which is a big advancement compared to the last 2 years. So my name is Laith Altimime, I think Chris explained, and over the next maybe few minutes, just to set the scene. And what you saw from the video is that semiconductors, which is, by the way, now indeed, as Chris mentioned, is referenced to as chips. It's empowering the entire digital economy, with beyond the automotive. Basically, it's enabling every industry. You see connectivity, AI. Basically, semiconductor is crucial in the digital transformation. And we are hearing today about the automotive and the impact on automotive. But I think if we reflect over the last couple of years, semiconductors also played instrumental role in advancing the development of the vaccine. This is where we are here today, and also in terms of the data analytics, what used to take over a week to do a normal PCR test, now it happens, within a matter of an hour or so. So this is really, hence it's not like the medical as the next automotive in terms of its crucial dependency on the semiconductor industry. We hear today, we heard a lot about the value chain, the supply chain disruptions. And these are the key strategic players that we have experienced over the last couple of years. It basically started with the COVID, which has really slowed down the whole thing, basically put the whole world in shutdown. But again, throughout the last 2 years, semiconductors really enabled the global economy to keep running with the homeschooling, working from home, and online shopping, and so on and so forth. Chip shortage, what started in around October timeframe 2020, was very much automotive level. But 1 year later, it became global crisis, impacting every industry, including the semiconductor industry itself, because you need the critical materials and the chips in order to continue to grow. The ongoing geopolitical tensions and export restrictions, that is an ongoing limitation, but also the talent shortage. I think you will see also this is key in terms of if we have to accelerate the development and also the manufacturing of semiconductors. Skills is of paramount importance to keep that running. And of course, we heard this morning, and it's ongoing, the Russia-Ukraine, and the impact it's had already also on the automotive as the first indicator, but again continues to impact the semiconductor industry as well as other industries. And to add even more complexity is the COVID-induced Shanghai lockdown. Again, this is causing major disruptions in the value chain. So there are a lot of moving dynamics in the supply chain. And there are, I think there was a couple of questions this morning, how could we predict, how could we forecast? I think with all these elements, it makes it even super difficult to predict or forecast. But there are elements that we could use in order to mitigate that, to have an early warning system, how we could work with that, and I'll show an example of that. The semiconductor value chain, so the silver lining of the COVID is basically it has accelerated the semiconductor, the digital transformation, and the demand, my apologies, for semiconductors in 2021, for the first time it exceeded the $500 billion in terms of revenue. And this year is expected to increase above the $600 billion in terms of revenue. This is a piece of the entire electronics, global electronics, which is about $2.5 trillion, $3 trillion industry. And this is continued to increase, and as we mentioned earlier, the complexity is not only the shortage, but the continued increase in demands that has really contributed to the complexity. And we could see here, basically, this is fab equipment, this is materials, all of which are crucial in order to grow the industry. This is a great opportunity, of course, for Europe, for the industry, and for Europe in particular, because there's a huge investment happening. I think most of you, all of us, heard European Chips Act. This is a huge investment to extend the Europe's market share in the global value chain with a target of 20% by 2030. So there's a lot of moving things that we need to work on in order to achieve that target. Not only advanced technology nodes, but also niche nodes. Both 200 millimeter and 300 millimeter wafer fabs are being continued to get built moving between now and 2030 in order to meet the continued increase in demands. Until this capacity comes in effect, we continue to see basically the forecast of the recovery of the supply chain continues to shift. It was expected to do end of 2021 and 2022, but now you can see it's all technologies, all elements of the chips that are continuing to see a very long extended lead time in order to which makes it more difficult to predict and forecast. Even if you go and order a new car today, you won't have a date by which time you'll get your car. Basically it's wait until you see, and you can't even have all functionalities. So the capacity is of paramount importance to enable better prediction, better forecast, because then you'll need to have the demand. And this is, again, which is also crucial for Europe. Key for Europe is not only advanced technology nodes, but also is niche technology nodes like power electronics, MEMS, sensors, all what Europe stands for in terms of strength in automotive, but also in other industries. What you see is, I think, there was a question, what could we have done? How could we predict? What could we do better? And I think Jean-François alluded that in his talk, is we need to provide the environment and the platform to have transparency across the entire layers of the value chain. This is very important. At SEMI in 2018, we created a pre-competitive platform to bring the semiconductor and the automotive industries together. The original goal was basically to reduce development times and cost, of course. And this has also proved instrumental that in terms of to create the environment whereby you bring the two industries together to collaborate, and most importantly, to partnership, so that you could really together overcome. And I think, again, Jean-François gave an example of Renault and ST, and we heard of other examples in most recent days how the automotive and the semiconductors come much closer. This platform is in 5 regions, which again, as our industry is global, and it is of paramount importance that it is also connected at all layers. The good news is that the semiconductor industry will continue to grow. So this is the forecast. What you can see here, this is the where we are today, is around $500 billion, and it's expected to double by 2030. And this is because of the increased demand for semiconductors for all. Basically, the digital transformation is the driver to move that. You saw from the video we are at 30 billion connected devices. By 2030, this is expected to reach 70, 80 billion. So there's a massive data generated. So you will need also the power, the ultra high performance computing power in order to deal with that. And of course, then you go into energy and how you mitigate that and what the role of the semiconductor industry in that. And again, what you can see here is that this is not only advancement, it's all technologies that are needed in order to move forward, in order to double the industry by 2030. And one key takeaway from this chart is that what has taken 50 years to reach to where we are today, the €500 billion revenue of semiconductor industry, is expected to double within this decade. So this gives you an indicator of the pace that the industry is growing at and the demand that continues to needed for that, for the digital economy, for the semiconductor industry. And again, I think more platforms, more partnerships, transparency is of key statement that it is needed to really have a good forecast, a good outlook onto how the dynamics across the entire value chain is important. Of course, we had also supply chain resilience, but also the semiconductor industry has a huge contribution factor on the carbon footprint. And again, this is something Europe leads in the sustainability, and I think the semiconductor industry now, this is a great opportunity to work again collectively together on addressing the sustainability, but also the supply chain resilience from both economical, but also from environmental perspectives. And last but not least, I reiterate that it's very important. I think you hear anywhere in the world that the diverse skills, diverse talent is very important. It's in the critical path, and if we expect the industry to double in the next 5 to 10 years, then the critical showstopper today is people, is talent, is skills that in order to enable that. And this is worldwide, and I think from our side as a European conference, in order to make sure that European maintains its leadership, it's also very of paramount importance for us to work together collectively so that we can maintain the talent pipeline in order to maintain Europe's growth and achieve the goal of 20% by 2030. And with that, I thank you again very much for your attention, and I move back to Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Laith. Have a seat at the end. Yeah. Thank you, Laith. I think that sets the scene, gives us a real view of what's happening in the wider semiconductor industry. I'd like to invite now to join us on the panel as well, Ron Glowinski from C&W. And C&W is quite specialized in semiconductor. It could even possibly say that it is the logistics company when it comes to the semiconductor supply chain. So thank you, Ron, for joining us. And have a seat perhaps in the middle. And we'll go into a few questions. It'll remain open to the audience as well, so we'll bring you in, and we won't delay you too much for lunch. But let's get into a few topics here. Ron, let me start with you actually. Can you talk a bit about how you're working with manufacturers in different ways? Obviously, I'm sure you've been at the sharp end of this crisis in many scenarios in terms of trying to mitigate the issues. How are you working today with your customers to try to minimize the sort of disruption we're seeing? Is it a more proactive approach than we've perhaps seen before?
Thank you for your question. First, I want to say that we are trying to predict the future and see what's the trends, etc. And I'm just imagining what will happen if the conflict between China and Taiwan will develop. And when the war in Ukraine started, many people spoke about the option that China will, I don't want to even to say this word, yes, but China is looking over Taiwan. Now, I don't know if you know, but in Taiwan, TSMC, a major supplier, supplies 54% of the production of the fabless companies. 54% is produced and manufactured in Taiwan. So that's a risk that we need to think about and maybe be prepared as well for it. And that's what I see, that the big manufacturings are already looking for other sites and other areas to manufacture their chips. As for ourselves, we developed all kinds of solutions for our customers through the pandemic. I mean, 2020 and 2021, we had to move more than 2,000 charter flights, which we didn't move before. So just to keep the supply chain running of those semiconductor manufacturers. And of course, we also support many of the automotive customers, and we see the demand coming. So in many cases, I see in the email the same, I mean, on one shipment, the same customers, I mean, from automotive and semiconductor pushing, and everything becomes urgent. So we tackle the issues when we had to land in LHR in Heathrow, and there was a helicopter waiting for us to move it directly to the factory. That's the kind of sensitivity we are facing at the moment.
So, I mean, that's the real crunch of it. But then what sort of risks do you see, leaving aside the real nightmare scenario of China and the Taiwan conflict? But in terms of the current lockdowns we're seeing already in Shanghai, okay, perhaps this can loosen, but are you already seeing knock-on impacts from that in terms of maintaining some of the supply?
Definitely. I have to call my colleagues in China every day and say, what can we do today? Every day changes. And we move according to the airports that are open. And it can be different day by day. So one day I'm moving from Beijing, one day I'm moving from Chengdu. I don't know, I mean, Shanghai is blocked at the moment. Very challenging. And we have to face it, and the pressure is huge from our customers, but we need to find the solutions.
So Laith, you obviously outlined just the scope and scale of this industry and where it's going and growing, in fact. One of the things we've talked about a few times with your colleagues at Semi and manufacturers is, up to this crisis, the automotive industry perhaps mainly managed the semiconductor industry at a distance through tier ones in many cases. I noted at the beginning that I believe we're starting to see a shift in that. It seems vital given the global context as well. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing from your members? How is that approach to supply chain relationship and design changing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this morning also sort of alluded to that, to the change in the business model. We don't go that far. 2018, when we tried to connect, the semiconductor industry and the automotive industry, this was initially a challenge because there was a lot of IP and sensitivity, as we all know. But I think it was important to collectively together, create the pre-competitive platform so that the industry can accelerate the cycle, the automotive industry, and also the semiconductor industry can provide the right technologies at the right time. The strategic driver then was autonomous driving, but as we know now, this has gone beyond that, including we heard this morning on the electrification. What we see was, and I think I also alluded that in my talk, is the paradigm shift we can see in the business model is that transparency is of key importance, for the OEMs to see across the entire end-to-end transparency, to see, how you can predict beyond the tier one, and I think all tiers of the layers. But this transparency and partnership is between automotive and the semiconductor industry, so that they can really have a much more, let's say, mitigation of the risks upcoming beyond, of course, the Ukraine war and the China lockdown. But this transparency, I think, is of paramount importance so that they can collectively, partnership to how they can do their technology design and to provide the needs. I think, as I said this morning, Jean-Francois mentioned that, Renault and ST, a month or two ago, BMW made the announcement with global foundries. So you see more and more of that, paradigm shift in the business model.
And you also talked about some capacities coming online, 200 to 300 millimeter capacity fabs. I mean, when will the industry in Europe perhaps start to feel the impact of those investments? It's not a quick lead time, but so what can we plan for?
Right. So I think what is really good timing for Europe compared to the other countries is that we had two 300 millimeter wafer fabs came live last year. This is the Infineon 300 millimeter wafer fabs in Villach, which is power electronic for automotive, as you know, but also the Bosch 300 millimeter wafer fabs that also opened last year in Dresden. 2 years ago, I think the question mark was, does Europe need two new 300 millimeter wafer fabs? And if you look at that today, it's absolutely crucial that we can see. So that is already, impacting, easing the pressure. But in terms of really meeting the full demand, as I said, is from the talk is, so the automotive was falling behind in terms of demand, and then automotive is now back on track. But alongside with the shortage, there is the continued increase in demand for all industries, and that is really putting the pressure. But so the next step is Europe is looking, to really continue to increase capacity, what they have. Like I think ST is doing that. Look at where you can increase capacity. Bosch in their Dresden fab also they're looking at increased capacity, and Reutlingen fab. So there are elements that the Europe manufacturers, Europe IDMs are looking at to increase the capacity, but the real ease of pressure is when more wafer fabs, 200, 300 millimeters, come live. And the expectation is that this is something around 2025 that we'll start to see new wafer fabs coming live.
So a little while to wait, but
yes,
there's something in the pipeline. Ron, how are you seeing this move regionally? I mean, your company alone in the last year, I believe, has opened quite a number of new offices, I think, just to help and support and manage this. So are you seeing strong demand out of Europe, or is it driven mainly by Asia? How would you describe the situation?
So obviously, most of the volumes are coming from Asia Pacific to Europe and into the USA and Mexico. But definitely we see the demand growing from Europe and the rest of the world, and that's a big challenge because there is not much capacity with the airlines out of Asia Pacific, and with the war between Russia and Ukraine, it's becoming even more challenging to move the freight, and the flights are longer. The fuel is going up. Prices are going up because the demand is much bigger than the supply. Fuel is going up, and the rates are getting outrageous. So this is another challenge, coming to your customer and telling them in a short time that we have to increase prices, we are trying to commit to the negotiated prices, but it's really challenging these days. And this is so we are talking about the fuel, we're talking about capacity, and the war between Russia and Ukraine that makes the flight even longer. So that's the thing we are facing at the moment.
And then on top of that, of course, the situation where passenger travel has opened up more.
Exactly, and so there are more suitcases and less capacity on the commercial planes. So that's where we see also that the airlines are investing more in cargo planes. Lufthansa announced that they have a new fleets for cargo, and they also saw that cargo becomes more profitable. So it's worthwhile to invest in it. So maybe this will be one of the solutions going forward.
I believe we have a suitcase of semiconductors for each of you to take on your flight home, please. So that would be much appreciated to support the industry. Laith, let's turn to Russia-Ukraine for a moment. When that, in the context of that conflict, there's also concern upstream when you look at materials like palladium and other factors which are largely sourced in this region. Have we already started to see or feel some impacts in the semiconductor industry from the upstream side, or is that a growing risk?
I think, again, initially, the automotive industry was first hit, but this was, I think, largely components. I think we heard from harnessing and so on. But the materials you mentioned, like the neon and the other materials, these are core materials, for manufacturing. Particularly the neon is an enabler for the lithography tools. So to date, it's on the critical path. We don't see it directly impacting it today, but of course, the industry starts to look at alternative sources for these materials. Yeah. But again, with the unpredictability, uncertainty of how this is going to move on, this adds more pressure in terms of they really need to look at all the alternative sources in order to mitigate. So it's really ongoing crisis that we hope that they can manage, but it will impact, absolutely, it will have an impact. It's really already highlighted by many of our member companies that this is something very seriously in the pipeline that they're looking to mitigate that.
I wanted to add that due to the big increase in rates, the difference between the premium service provider and the regular air freight provider almost gone. So we see even the demand is even growing more because the customer prefer to have the customer service 24/7 and the follow-up and the technology that we can provide at the same price of moving just a regular cargo. And that's where we see another more and more demand for the service because anyway you're going to pay very high rate.
Yeah, absolutely. Laith, we turn back again to the European supply chain in terms of the wafer fabs which are coming online and some of the long-term but positive steps in that direction. I think if you analyze the supply chain, of course, upstream it gets a little more complicated too, whether it's the packaging houses and where they're located, or as you pointed out, the lead time for certain components within that certainly much, much longer. So in reality, when this localization takes a clear step forward in Europe, is it not the case that actually we will still be rather dependent on Asian global locations to really optimize this?
So indeed, I think supply chain resilience can be regional but also global. The industry is global, whether it's automotive, semiconductor, everything is global, digital economy is global. But I think the importance is that you have some control over your supply chain so that it's not, what we have learned is that, for example, this is part of the European Chips Act, is not only but just in manufacturing, but also in providing a more resilient supply chain. And this is investing in packaging, which is something Europe, we have key players here in the semiconductor industry in Europe, but also more on the design, so that we could really do a much more controlled way of supply chain rather than, it's not total sovereignty, that, we close the door, we can operate internally as a Europe. We will always be, part of the global supply chain, but we will have a much more resilient European supply chain with the investment that is upcoming in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you very much. We're not too far from lunch, but if there's any questions from the audience while we have this opportunity, we can take, Greg, I'm loving it, right? In the beginning, a reliable question. We'll take the first question from Greg, and then we'll move to the second question there, right here in the front.
Greg Ombach from Airbus. I would like to point question direction on the lights. And when I looked your page about, or the slide, how the development is going to be in the future, of course, now we are more AI driven and it's going to go in direction of quantum and so on. On the other hand, when we are looking on the car development towards more autonomous, then the car manufacturers are taking over and over more responsibility for the software design car. It means they are designing their own software architecture and also hardware architecture. And with this, the tier one supply chain, which was still now responsible mostly for the subsystems or systems, is getting more and more, I would say, responsibility for the design of the components which are going later on into the vehicle. During my time at Qualcomm, something like about 8 years ago, I worked on such kind of assistance for automotive. And at that time, my collaboration partner was the tier one or tier two. Nowadays, what I see is a completely shift towards the OEM. And I would like to get your perspective, how the supply chain is going to look like in about 10 years from now, once the OEMs are really designed their own vehicles and they took responsibility for own hardware as well. As we have heard today morning from Renault, they already doing some power electronics. And then the question is how much more downstream they are going to go in area of semiconductors. Thank you.
Very welcome. Is this to me or to Francois? So I think it's a great question. I think it definitely. So I think things evolve. So I think this morning Michelle said what used to work in the past doesn't work anymore. This is a fact. There's a paradigm shift that we need to adapt, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take years to move forward. So indeed, in the next 3 to 5, 10 years, there is it. But we already see that paradigm shift. I think I said in the past, maybe the automotive industry is much better placed, but your tier one is your gate. They will provide you all the design, all the chips, all the technologies that you need. What has become apparent from the OEM is that this transparency beyond the tier one is of paramount importance so that they can have visibility moving forward onto that. And we already see that. We already see more synergies coming up. That it does not mean that you take tier one out of the way. Absolutely not. I think the whole business model needs to transfer and become more transparent. From the OEM side, I think it's great that they have a better understanding of the technologies. When you get a system on chip, you plug it into the automotive, then you really don't know. Like in your iPhone, you have a new iPhone, you don't know what technology you have in there. This is key now. This is very important to understand what is in that chip and what in the package. And in order to do that, I think you need to have a much closer dialogue between the automotive industry, and I mean all layers, but also the semiconductor. So basically, you synergize the two industries across the entire value chain. This is definitely needed to evolve moving forward.
Thank you very much. We had, I think, our last audience question. We'll take it right here in the front.
Good afternoon. My name is Axel Bantel from Wallenius Wilhelmsen. We are in global finished vehicle logistics and ro-ro shipping. And the question goes to Laith. You were talking a little bit how the relationship and how you work with your customers, specifically the OEMs, have evolved during that time of the crisis. You were talking about this paradigm shift in terms of end-to-end transparency, and also how you live your partnership with your customers. And I'm very curious what this really means. What has changed for you more particular?
Yeah, sure. I think we already heard one example this morning from Renault. What has changed is it's really the old model, which was OEM. So two industries run in parallel. The semiconductor industry delivers chips, they deliver packages, they deliver technologies to the tier one, and then the automotive industry, the OEM, they use that to plug it into the cars. What has changed is that now has become much more dialogue between the OEMs and the semiconductor industry, so they have a clear transparency on what technologies. When the chip shortage happened, the biggest question, which not many people could answer, was what chips are short, which technologies? And not many people could answer that question. Now, with the paradigm shift, now they have a clear understanding what is in the package that they need and what are the technologies. And you will soon begin to realize that at the start of the crisis, the first call was to TSMC Taiwan. We need chips. What we realize is this is not the absolute critical part. There are a lot of other chips that we do here. And as I mentioned, like Infineon and Bosch and ST, that provide a tremendous amount of these chips on the package. So this has become more transparent. This becomes more visible, and it's good that the semiconductor industry and the OEM industry, the automotive industry, become aligned. Particularly now, even we're talking EV. This is also new, a new paradigm. So they need to be a good dialogue to understand how to partner, in order to be able to meet, the automotive demands. And I think this model will evolve to other industries also, by the way, and I reference to medical. I think this will also be what is referred to as the next automotive. Transparency, partnership, I hope I could answer your question with that one. And I think, as I said, as you hear, instead of having your own supply chain, i.e. the Tesla model, there are two, the secondary paradigm shift is that the OEMs realize the importance of the software. So it's not only the hardware, but also the software, so that they can really understand in terms of like what are they needed. And again, if you look at VW Group with the Carrier, this is their own software. So things will continue to evolve. This is very much based on company to company. But I think the need in terms of like dialogue, and so that you don't need to create the Tesla model, let me put it that way. I think you need partnership with your semiconductor industry, because the tier of equipment, materials, and so on, and they will provide you the technology and the design that you needed in timely manner. Particularly so once the new capacity comes online.
Please. Thank you.
Like I met with one of our tier one, told me that 1 year ago nobody knew in the company what is the word semiconductor. Suddenly everybody just say semiconductor all over. And I also saw an interview with one of the CEO of the machine manufacturers, one of the biggest machine manufacturers for the semiconductor industry. This machine is used to manufacture the chips, right? So the demand to his machines are growing, but at the same time he needs the chip to manufacture the machines. So it's like a catch-22 that he's trying to solve, and this is really funny. But hopefully we'll solve it soon.
Yes, we're all laughing hysterically, aren't we? No, you're absolutely right. But so I know we're coming close.
True, yes.
We're coming close to the end here, but I just thought I'd ask for some last thoughts. What are the opportunities in the semiconductor and automotive supply chain that are really exciting you most now as you look ahead? The challenges are enormous, but there's opportunities there as well. I'm going to start with you, Ron.
If you look at the global plans and the new factories that are coming in Europe and in the USA, because the governments understood that they cannot rely only on Asia-Pacific factories. So I see the movement of more factories and more supply chain, of course, demand will be going to the US and Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really so currently Europe is about 8% of the global semiconductor market share. And I think the most exciting is really, as we showed, is that we continue to grow as part of this doubling of the industry by 2030, and then achieve the 20% of the global market share, more than double by 2030. And again, I think the message is there's great opportunities, but there are things that we need to work on, like the sustainability, like the supply chain, and like the skills that we need to work on in order to make sure that we achieve this goal. And this is really, for Europe, is a great opportunity, and for me also, for SME Europe, is a great opportunity and exciting.
Indeed.
I think this is the most excitement that Europe has seen in the semiconductor industry for the last 20 years. So there's a lot of great opportunities ahead.
The question is if the semiconductor manufacturer would like to keep this price level, and for how long? Let's see.
Let's see, indeed. Well, thank you, Laith. Thank you, Ron. Fascinating insights. Really great way to bring us up to lunch. Well, thank you very much, firstly, for that.